Yo guys, what is going on? Blossom's back. Welcome back to another episode of Top Drives. And my god, this video, the setup for this video took way longer than I expected. We're talking like breaking on 4 hours. The amount of data that I had to collect and compile just to make this entire video took way longer than I expected. So I do hope that you enjoy today's video. Okay, it's a little bit of Top Drives history mixed in with just my preferences on every single special tag challenge we have gotten. Well, almost every single special tag challenge we've gotten literally since the start, from the first silver screen all the way till, well, nightmare fuel that is going on right now. So I'm gonna be ranking every single pack from the worst to the best in my personal opinion. And one thing that I do want to let you guys know about is that I'll be judging these packs at the peak of their powers. It's not fair to judge like in the shadows, because like if I judge in the shadows now in today's climate, most of the cards are going to be garbage, because almost everything that came after World Expo trumps everything that came before World Expo. You know what I mean? So I'll be judging each pack by the peak of their powers and ranking them from 21 to 1. I have 21 special events. I am missing a couple. I'm missing all of the Lunar New Year stuff. So like, you know, Year of the Rabbit, Tiger, whatever we've had. And I'm missing the first ever silver screen, which was the first ever special tag challenge, and the first ever Call of the Wild. But I think I have just about every other special tag that we've had. So without further ado, guys, let's get into it from the worst to the best. Now, take this with a grain of salt. It's my personal opinion to what I think is the worst or the best. Let me know down in the comments below if you agree or disagree. But if you do disagree with the pack that comes in last place, you have a serious problem, because the worst challenge that we have ever had in Top Drives in 21st place is Horror Show. I don't think anything will ever be worse than Horror Show. Also, for those of you guys watching, a fun little mini game, the background for all these cards, you can see there's a 6x6 Mercedes, right? It changes with every single pack. So if you can identify every single background car for the 21 packs, comment down below. You can get bragging rights. I might give you a shout out in the next video. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, the worst of the worst was Horror Show, man. Without a doubt, everything in this was just absolutely garbage. Even at the peak of its powers, nothing here was actually good besides the spikers. That's it. And not even every single spiker. Only the spikers C8, the 72, and the Spiker C8 SW. Actually, you're going back, the Spiker C8 SWB wasn't even good back then, because that was actually counted as a low tier epic. So the only good one was the C8, like I said, at the peak of their powers at their time. And at the time this pack was released, I'm pretty sure the C8 Prelator Spider was legendary, the Mercedes AMG G63 was epic, and the Chrysler Crossfire was actually an ultra rare. So shift some things around and the pack actually gets worse. I would say that the Horror Show now is a better pack than Horror Show back when it came out. So yeah, that's the worst one in my opinion. Now moving on to 20th place, the second worst in my opinion, came out pretty recently as Immortalized in Carbon. I absolutely hated this pack because it literally just was a collaboration of Lamborghini and Morgan, which doesn't really end in anything good. We all know that Morgans are absolute garbage in Top Drives, and this pack was majority Morgan. You look at the legendaries and you're getting some of the weakest legendaries in the game. You get the Morgan, the RQ80, you get some of the weirder Gallardos, even the highest rated stuff is just a piece of crap. The only good takeaways from this pack was like the Huara Roadster, the Giulia GTA, that's it really. Like, I mean, there's some okay ultra rares in there, like the Prototipo is good as well, but for the most part, the amount of garbage just triumphs everything else, outweighs everything else. So this thing was terrible. Now moving on in 19th place was Silver Screen 2. Silver Screen 2 was really boring. There wasn't a lot to work with. The legendaries were okay, right? Koenigsegg, McLaren. But outside of that, the ultra rares were really under par, and the epics were really boring as well. Remember, at the time of Silver Screen 2, we've already had updates like European Revolution for sure, and maybe, I don't know, definitely not World Expo. I can't remember. I don't think we were in the realm of American Frontier just yet, but even then, before American Frontier, the Green Challenger was never the best Challenger. At the time, the Charger was the best. So, you know, there weren't a lot of good options. The CT6 was good, right? But at the peak of its powers, the CT6 wasn't actually the best car at the time, because this was before the DS Numero buff. You see what I mean? This is a lot of Top Drives memory going on in my head when Silver Screen 2 was out, the DS Numero was not buffed yet, which meant that the CT6 wasn't as valuable as it was then than it is now, etc, etc. But the pack didn't really bring anything good. If you didn't get a legendary, you were probably going to get a bust. The epics weren't good, the ultras weren't good, besides maybe the R33 and the Nismo. Like, aside from the Nissans, there wasn't much to get for. Now, in moving on, in 18th place, it's Famous Tracks. Famous Tracks, again, was really boring. The legendaries didn't give much variety. It was kind of like the McLaren F1 or bust. The Panamera is also useless now to take on and stuff, but obviously if I'm judging by the peak of its powers, and the take on didn't exist back then, but the Panamera wasn't even the best anyway, because you could use the Epic at the time, Mitsubishi Evo 8. The Roof Turbo Florio was like, okay, it was meh, you know, and the Epics leaved very little to be desired. These weren't even the best Porsche Epics. I mean, you get yourself one Epic Porsche RSR, it beats everything in the dry, right? The Spiker D12 was pretty cool at the time, was known as the Peking to Paris, and I think that was before it actually got its top speed buff, so it wasn't actually that good back then. But yeah, it was just a pretty boring pack. There's not a single Blossom choice lying around anywhere. None of these cars will actually get you a lot of value. So yeah, that was 18th. Now moving on, in 17th place, I'm gonna give it to Top Drives' what would you call it? As Seen on YouTube, the collaboration of CarWow. Again, it was a pretty boring pack. Much like Famous Tracks, there wasn't much that was going on. Not a lot of Blossom choice cars. It was a little bit better in a sense where there were some kind of, you know, brighter positives as opposed to Famous Tracks. Like, you could get yourself the BMW 420i, for example. That was really good. The Honda Civic, you can never go wrong with the Honda Civic. And there were some pretty new cars like the M3 Competition Saloon and the Focus RS, which were pretty good. But the legendaries were terrible. I mean, it was 80, 82, 83, and then you jumps up to 96. Like, there isn't much to be desired from this. When I opened the pack, well, I didn't open the pack, but if I were to open the pack, there wasn't going to be much that I was looking forward to anyway. So I'm going to put it in the bottom half of the bracket. Now, moving on to 16th place is the second edition of Call of the Wild, which was a lot worse than the first Call of the Wild. Now, the reason that brings the pack down so badly is the abundance of Murcielagos. I promise you this, if it wasn't for all those Murcielagos, this pack would be so much better. On top of that, Call of the Wild, the first one, included the Viper ACR. The second one actually took out the Viper ACR, which was a huge shame. Now, there are good things to talk about this pack, and every pack that comes after this one, there are good things to talk. There are redeeming qualities. The good thing about this pack at the peak of its powers was that if you were an American collector, then a lot of the epics here were going to be super useful for you. At the time when you opened Call of the Wild 2, you were getting the best American hybrid in the Viper SRT8. You're getting the best American off-roader in the Ford Raptor. Now, I understand that it's not the best anymore. But like I said, I'm judging these packs at the peak of their powers at the time when they were released, right? The Bronco is also really strong, to be fair. The Bronco is still very strong. In terms of the cars that can give you the biggest impact in Top Drives today, I would kind of argue that it would be the Bronco concept because it is such a beast in diesel off-road events. On top of that, the Guara is still really, really good. But like I said, at the time, Call of the Wild 2, the epics were okay, especially if you're an American collector. But all of those Murcielagos, god damn, that sucked. That sucked so bad. Moving on to 15 places, In the Shadows. Now, In the Shadows wasn't that bad in my opinion. It was just really boring. Like, there was barely anything you could get. At the peak of its powers, it was pretty good, actually. The Alfetta was like one of the best off-roaders at the time. And then you had the Citadel, which was ultra rare at the time, which was also pretty damn good. You had the Charger Daytona that was ultra rare at the time, which had like 90 MRA, which was also really good. So at the time, In the Shadows was alright. It was just pretty boring. It was just two legendaries and not a lot of epics that you could get. It was a bit of a joke, to be honest. At the time, I think it was only like 5 or 6 epics that you could have unpacked. It was the Spiker, the Dodge, the Lotus, the Aston Martin, and the Fiat. So 5, because the Citadel used to be an ultra back in the day. So yeah, it was just kind of like, are you serious? That's it? That's all you're giving us? But it wasn't that bad. Just boring. Now, moving on to 14th place was Summer Games. Now, Summer Games actually had some pretty decent cars. Things like the Ford GT, the Aero Atom 4, which is the best aerial. You had cars like the ATS V, the Cadillac CT6, and it also had the Caterham 270, the Infiniti Emerge. In terms of ultra rares, you know, this was, I think, before the time of the Zenith. So the Lotus 340R was still really sorted after at the time. But the issue with summer games, in my opinion, was that there's just too much garbage. Like, it was a really big pack compared to like In the Shadows that we just saw. This is like 5 times the size. And like, yes, there are some good cars in there, like the Donkavort as well. But for the most, and the Dodge Circuit EV. But for the most part, there was still more garbage than good. Like, I would not want to get myself an Audi or any of the mid-tier Koenigseggs or the lower tier Nissans or the SLS. I mean, I want the SLS from like a bias standpoint. I love Mercedes, but like, you know, in terms of top drives, that car is useless. A lot of the epics are kind of just like trash, like the Volvo, the Infiniti, the Porsche, the Nissan, the Cadillac. Like, you wouldn't want any of that. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of just clutter in this pack, and that's why I'm gonna give it 14th place. Now, moving on to 13 was Ride of the Valkyries. If you guys remember, this was kind of like Hudge's excuse to basically give out a bunch of Gumperts, which were cool. The Polos are good cars. They really are. They were the best of German Renaissance, I believe. But what really weighs the pack down is the Diablos. I would say if it wasn't for the Diablos, this pack would be so much better. Not to forget, right, back then, I'm pretty sure that these two Diablos were also considered legendary back when this pack was a thing. So, you know, it was kind of in a situation where there are not a lot of good epics. The Phaeton wasn't the best center tire. The Diablo was kind of lackluster. Well, actually, all the Diablos were really lackluster. And when it came to the legendary, it was like a 50-50. You were either getting a legendary that was really good or a legendary that's completely garbage. So that's kind of the reason why Ride of the Valkyries isn't that far down, not in the top 10, because the Diablos, the Lamborghinis just weighed this pack down. Now, moving on is Around the World in 12th place. Now, this one is controversial, and yes, there's no Top Drives Club's database for these, so I had to go find an old like video and then screenshot everything from the video and put it here. Now this is gonna cause some controversy. Like, I think a lot of people are gonna be saying like, Blossom, how the hell is this pack better than all the other packs that we saw on the list? Like I said, I'm judging the cars by the peak of their powers, right? At the end of the peak of the powers, all these Lotuses. Let's not forget, if you were playing around the time of Great Exhibition, you wanted these Lotuses, because not only did they handle incredibly well, back then those Camry V6s all had like 100 MRA. You remember that? Back then in Great Exhibition, every single Lotus had like 100 MRA. Like, it was ridiculous. And not only did they have 100 MRA, they had 100 handling. If you could max them out, like, these cars were incredible value. You know, who remembers back then when the Lotus Evora 400 was one of the best hybrid epics of the time? It had like 100 MRA. It could go up to 98 handling. It was ridiculous, right? So like, back then, when Around the World was released, yes, I actually wanted this pack. You could get those OP Lotuses at the time. Yes, now they're all epics. Yes, they're not as good anymore. But like I said, I'm judging the pack by the peak of its powers. And not to mention, the Bentayga was an absolute beast back then as well, with, you know, being the best all-surface tire dragster back in the day. So that's one thing to consider. But that's why I'm giving it 13th place. Now, moving on to 12. And I'm moving on to 11th place was Interstellar. Interstellar, in my opinion, is just a better version of that Gumpert pack, which was like the Ride of the Valkyries or whatever, because it also includes the Gumperts, but it doesn't include the stupid Diablos, right? But they add some pretty cool stuff like the Peugeot Quasar and some of the pretty good Volvos as well, and the Challenger SRT10 concept, which is a fantastic dragster. So this was literally like Ride of the Valkyries, but better, right? So in my opinion, it gets a higher spot. Now, moving on to the top 10, we start with Riders of the Storm. Very similar to Ride of the Valkyries and Interstellar, when they were highlighting just a niche legendary brand. Those packs with Gumpert is this pack with Pagani, right? So there are a lot of Paganis that you can get. Honestly, it was a really small pack, but you could do very little wrong. I mean, out of everything that I see here, and back then, right, the Ghiblis, all these 3 Maseratis were considered ultras back then. I would say that the only really crap stuff would be the Levante S and the Maserati Ghibli. Like, that was it. Like, I mean, I guess you can say that these super rares now that used to be ultras were also terrible, yes. But for the most part, like, all the high-end stuff were pretty good. The GMC Typhon, the Pagani Sonda C12, which used to be regarded as one of the best hybrid epics. the GMC Cyclone, and honestly speaking, I don't think there's a single bad legendary. Every single Pagani that you see here has more than 100 MRA, and at the peak of their powers, these cars were really freaking good. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good pack. Welcome to the top 10. Now, moving on in 9th place is the Great Outdoors. Now, the Great Outdoors, in my opinion, was pretty decent. It brought the better Lamborghinis, not the bad ones. It didn't bring the Murcielagos and one of the Gallardos. It brought the Huracans and the better Huracans at that, right? On top of that, it also brought the best Paganis. It brought the Huayra Roadster BC and the Huayra Tricolor. The Epics were okay, hit or miss. I would say about a 50-50. You know, Huracan Spider is cool, C12 is cool, the Volkswagen is ridiculously OP, and you can't go wrong with the GMC Typhoon, but you have some pretty bad stuff like the Subaru Forester and the GMC Acadia. So it's a pretty hit or miss stuff. For the most part, you know, when we get into the top 10, in my opinion, the positives outweigh the negatives, right? And I think there are more good things to unpack here than garbage. Now, moving on to 8th place, it's Photo Finish, the event that we literally just had. Now, like I said, I'm judging the cars by the peak of the packs, by the peak of the powers, and what Photo Finish actually brought to the table were just a bunch of new cars. I think a lot of people can agree, you know, whether you're a new player, an intermediate player, or an advanced player like myself, there were a lot of cars here that we did not have when this tag came out, which meant that it gave you incentive to open the pack, and it also gave you cars that were brand new and were pretty good. You were getting some of the best Porsches from Enter the Black Forest, you were getting some of the best BMWs from Enter the Black Forest, and you were getting some pretty decent Epics as well. I mean, I can't deny it, but like things like the Lotus Exige, the Aston Martin Vantage, the Mercedes AMG, and even the Hyundai Veloster were all really good cars to unpack. Did I unpack any of them? Actually, yes, I did get the Exige. I didn't get anything else. I would have liked the Hyundai, and I would have liked a car that could get me the Test Bowl win so I could win the Hyundai. Alas, I didn't get it, right? So in terms of like looking for a Test Bowl car, it's a pretty crappy pack, but it actually isn't that bad. There's some pretty decent Epics here. The Porsche, the Photo Finish update has basically told me that this Porsche is a pretty damn good Test Bowl car. You have things like the Alpha GTA, which is 100 handling front wheel drive. It's really strong in that sense in its niche. You have things like the Alpha 1750, which isn't too bad as well. Like I said, positives outweigh the negatives, you know? So, and also if you're a saloon collector, you're getting things like the Audi V8 Quattro, the Audi DTM, the M3 Competition. There's kind of like a niche for everybody over here. It's not a bad pack in my opinion. Now moving on, it was a bad timing to release the pack, but I think it wasn't a bad pack. 7th place goes to the Christmas collection of 2021. Not the most recent one, but the one that came before it. Now why this pack is so far up the list in my opinion are the legendary, bro. Like, you were getting at the time, at the peak of its powers, the best all-surface tire car in the game in the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, and you were getting the Regera. The Regera was like a game changer back then. It was worth more than a Bugatti Chiron, right? And like, if you most recently won the most recent Tri-Series prize card, the BMW, you would attest that the Regera is ridiculously strong. At the time, you had the McLaren 720S Spider, which was a lot stronger back in the day. You're getting the Porsche GT3 RS, which is a fantastic, you know, great bargain legendary to use that still kills Epics. And the Epics in this pack were pretty good as well, right? Like the Vanquish Zagato, which was pretty good, but to be fair though, back then it was a legendary, I believe. And then you were getting, you know, the TVR Griffith, which was a really good car back at the time. It had really good MRA, handled well for its time. So I thought the Christmas collection was actually pretty damn good. Now moving on, in 6th place is the Christmas collection from last year. I just thought that Christmas collection last year was a little slight improvement, and the reason for that was because I thought the Epics carried more depth. You were getting more, you know, you're getting a really good standard tire car in the Mercedes-Benz E400. You're getting the M3 Competition, which is like this absolutely amazing berserk German dragster. The DB11 is a great all-rounder, and the legendaries were good too. You could get yourself a Porsche Taycan, which is, oops, I don't know, oh, I just dropped my iPad. You could get yourself the Porsche Taycan, the best city streets car in the game, right? Non-prize, that is. You were getting the Zanavi, which is alright. You're getting the 670 LT. The McLarens, they always find themselves in the pack. These McLaren Spiders, I swear to God, but I thought there was more body in this pack. That was pretty good. Ultra rares left little to be desired. There were some decent options that you could get, like the challengers. But aside of that, and the TWR is pretty damn good too. I thought this pack was pretty good. Moving on, in fifth place is Racing Royalty. Now, what really boosts the value of Racing Royalty, in my opinion, are the legendaries that it provides, right? Once again, the Quadrifoglio, the best, right? All-service tire of his time. Porsche 956 is fantastic. High top speed, 100 MRA. Honda NSX is one of your best four-wheel drive, low ground clearance Japanese cars. Porsche 911 GT2 RS is just, you know me, man. I love that car. Viper ACR as well. One of my absolute favorites. You can definitely say that bias brought this pack up for me. But like I said, this is my personal opinion at the end of the day. And like, come on, it's got 2 out of 3 of my holy trinity here. 911 GT2 and the Viper ACR. I mean, I can't complain about that. Epics were pretty bad, to be honest. Nobody wants the Bentleys, but to be fair, the Ultima was cool. Yeah, I was definitely biased about this one. But the legendaries, you can't, like, the legendaries are actually really good. And I've said a few times on the channel, right? Like, I actually see value in the Bentley Flying Spur, it being medium ground clearance, it being the saloon, it being four-wheel drive as well. A little less value now with APGP, but still pretty damn good. Moving on to fourth place is Nightmare Fuel. So the one going on right now, actually. Now, like I said, at the peak of its powers, this is a pack that is basically giving you a chance at getting the best dragsters in the entire game, right? In terms of epics, at least, you were getting yourself the Charger wide body and the Challenger wide body. And then in terms of legendaries, you are getting the Hennessy Venom GT, which is the best American dragster that you can unpack, which is also really good. Basically, if you're an American collector, this is the pack for you. Things like the McLarens are also pretty decent, but obviously the Murcielago goes way down a little bit. The Audi's kind of lackluster, and there, some of the epics are kind of meh. But for the most part, we basically just reviewed this pack like yesterday, and it's not bad. It brings value. Most of it are average or better. Moving on to the top 3, Cutting Edge. Now, Cutting Edge, if this came out before World Expo, this may have been one of the most incredible packs ever in terms of like just unbiased like general game stats, right? Because before World Expo, you'd be getting like what, the Chiron, the Rimac, and the Veyron in the same pack. Not to mention the Lamborghini Aventador SV Roadster, which is one of the best four-wheel drive Lamborghinis in the game, right? You're also getting the Peugeot Oxia with ridiculous MRA and the Aero Atom 4, which is pretty damn good as well. If you were judging this pack before World Expo, things like the Zonda were pretty damn good. But then obviously the pack wouldn't include the Hyundai Ioniq, which is now one of the best standard tire epics in the entire game as well. And also you're getting the Cyclone, which is one of your best standard tire pickup trucks, and etc. etc. In terms of outros, it's pretty good. It has cars like the Honda NSX, the Aero Atom 1, the R33, which is a lot better now than it was back then when Silver Screen 2 came out, because that car got a buff in between. But yeah, it's a really good pack. Honestly, if this came out before World Expo, it might be higher up on the list. But I digress. This was pretty good. Moving on to the top 2 now. In second place is Loves Me or Loves Me Not. In my opinion, I thought the legendaries were pretty solid. You were getting things like the Bugatti Veyron, the Porsche 962C, again, the Koenigsegg Regera, the Lancia ECV, the BMW M5, and of course the Subaru Legacy, which is a niche because it has that saloon tag. The epics were really good, especially during its time, right? Before Pacific Coast Highway, right? You still had the Charger, which was ridiculously OP. You had the best American twisty cars in the Mustangs. The Tuscan race car was really good. KTM, can't go wrong with that. Not the best KTM, but it was still pretty good. And then you were getting things like the Nissan Bluebird, a fantastic saloon off-roader. Obviously, this was really strong before APGP. This pack came out before APGP. Outros are pretty damn good too. You're getting things like the Lotus Elise SC, the Suzuki Ignis, which is still a Blossom Choice car towards this day. This pack had very little wrong. I mean, yeah, there were some duds like your Porsche 911 Turbo, your BMW 745, and your Jaguar CX-75, but for the most part, this pack was pretty damn solid. Second place. But in my opinion, in first place, I think a lot of you guys may see this coming. In my opinion, still this day, especially at the peak of its powers, this pack was the best in first place. It's two-tone. It's gotta be two-tone, dude. Two-tone was like the challenge. It was the challenge. There was so little wrong. At the peak of its powers, you were getting a pre-nerf Bentayga diesel when it used to be ridiculous. You were getting the Bluebird, which was at the time one of the best off-road saloon cars. And then in terms of legendaries, it was just hit after hit after hit. You know, you were getting one of the better Bentleys. Those were one of the better. That's the Bentley. The Deadpool Bentley is the one with like 90 MRA, right? You were getting a ridiculous GT2 RS, which is one of your best German all-rounder cars, especially before the time of World Expo. You were getting the Bugatti Veyron, right, which is only behind the Chiron. You were getting the Onyx, which was like, you know, ridiculous, especially if you were in that, if you participated in the last Tri-Series with that BMW, the Shadow, the Shining Shadow, whatever, you would know how good the Onyx is. The GT3 RS, again, I've said many good things about it. The DNX was a chock full of niches at the time, you know, 2000s, four-wheel drive, American Frontier, concept, saloon, everything, right? It was a great pack. The saloons were pretty, I mean, not the saloons, but the ultra rares were decent too. You were getting, you know, the Magan Trophy, you're getting the Suzuki C2, you were getting the Nissan Pulsar, which was really good back in the day as well. This was, in my opinion, the best special tag pack that we could have opened. But anyway, guys, let me know down in the comments below if you enjoyed this video and if you agree with my takes. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great day. We're gonna stay safe, wash your hands, blossom out. Peace.
Bro, this song just makes me so happy.
Me too.
Imagine being Asian in the 50s, looking nifty, leather jacket, looking sleek, look like Presley, look so deadly. Got a jukebox back at home, feeling jazzy, turn it on and play it slow, like the movies with the ladies.
They so fine.
Imagine being Asian in the 50s, looking nifty, leather jacket, looking sleek, look like Presley, look so deadly. Got a jukebox back at home, feeling jazzy, turn it on and play it slow, like the movies with the ladies.
They so fine.
Sit back, relax in my Bonneville Pontiac. Hold tight all night.